The 14 worlds of the Iron Meridian did not fall easily. Well, most of them did. Vorruk-Thane would admit, in the privacy of his own mind, that worlds 8 through 11 had been embarrassingly quick. Agrarian civilizations. Very polite. Very flat. The kind of planets that seemed to exhale with relief when you conquered them, as if they'd been waiting for someone to take responsibility. But the other 10, those had been campaigns. Resistance. Orbital defense grids. Unified militaries. One particularly unpleasant world with underground railguns that destroyed 17 ships before his forces adapted. He had adapted. He always adapted. That was why he was fleet commander. That was why, when the High Council needed someone to absorb the small, loud planet at the edge of the Orion Spur, the one broadcasting radio signals for barely a century, hadn't cracked interstellar travel yet, they called Vorruk-Thane. It was beneath him, but the planet had resources. Rare isotopes, vast oceans, a biosphere so dense with life it registered on sensors like static. The humans had not responded to the standard offer of peaceful absorption. They had responded with questions. Which governing body are you addressing? Are you aware there are 193 sovereign nations on this planet? Do you have documentation? Can you hold, please? The holding lasted 6 of their days. When the response came, it was from something called the United Nations General Assembly Emergency Session. 37 pages, 17 languages, and a footnote asking whether the fleet was in compliance with something called the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. Vorruk-Thane had conquered 14 worlds. Not one had asked about his documentation. He ordered standard orbital suppression, a show of force, just enough to communicate the fundamental reality. There was a fleet above their planet, and they were very small. The humans watched with what his intelligence officers described as intense interest. Then one of their news networks ran a special report on it, with a panel of experts, who disagreed with each other. He decided he would simply land forces and be done with it. This was his first mistake. The biological survey of Sol 3 had been conducted by the academic vessel Persistent Inquiry 6 months prior. 912 pages. Submitted to Fleet Command, cataloged, indexed, accessible to every officer. Read, in its entirety, by exactly one person. Junior xenobiologist Preet Sala, who had written her graduate thesis on carbon-based predator ecosystems and found the whole document riveting and deeply alarming. She submitted a summary memo. The memo was filed under NON urgent/academic/fauna notes. The officer who filed it had skimmed the introduction, noted it was about animals, and reasonably concluded that animals were not a tactical concern. Reasonable on every other planet. Prey animals ran. Predators avoided large groups. Nothing on any of the 14 worlds had ever threatened a soldier in full combat armor, standing in formation. What the filing officer did not know, because almost no one had read past page 47, was that the section titled Megafauna and Apex Predators ran for 319 pages. For a single planet. Preet Sala had written, in that section's opening paragraph, in a tone that for an academic document came very close to screaming. Sol 3 presents the most comprehensively hostile macrobiological environment in the surveyed catalog. This assessment applies not to isolated regions or extreme biomes, but to the planet's surface as a whole, including areas the dominant sapient species has densely settled and considers, by their own cultural standards, safe. The fauna detailed here are not anomalies. They are not confined to remote wilderness. They are present in and adjacent to population centers and developed infrastructure, and the local sapient species interacts with them with a casualness that the survey team found, frankly, unsettling. The word unsettling appeared 14 times in the survey. Preet Sala had considered horrifying, but felt it was unprofessional. She would later reflect that unprofessionalism might have saved lives. The first landing party set down in Queensland, Australia. Low population density. Flat terrain. Coastal proximity for supply logistics. Every standard criterion for a beachhead. What Fleet Command did not know, on page 208, under the subheading Continent, Australia, special notation, was that Australia had been geographically isolated long enough to independently develop the concept of what if everything here could kill you, and had pursued that concept with remarkable commitment. The notation read, The authors recommend that any ground forces operating in this region be briefed extensively on local fauna before deployment. We wish to be unambiguous. This is not a precautionary statement. This is a requirement. We have cataloged 87 species in the immediate coastal zone capable of killing an organism of average sapient body mass within 4 hours. 21 within 20 minutes. For within the time, it would take a field medic to open their kit. There was a footnote. The footnote said, "We are aware this sounds like an exaggeration. It is not." The first landing party encountered a funnel web spider 11 minutes after touchdown. The funnel web spider was, by Sol 3 standards, medium-sized, approximately the width of a human hand. It had been living under a rock near the landing site. It was not happy about the situation. Its venom attacked the nervous system with a speed Preet Sala had dedicated an entire subsection to, noting it had apparently evolved to be specifically devastating to primate nervous systems, which was extraordinary given that the spider predated primates and had no apparent reason to develop such a specialization except, as she wrote, sheer spite, or possibly just statistical horror. Private Duan Recht was not a primate. The venom worked on him anyway. The medic noted that the spider had not been provoked. It had simply emerged from under the rock, assessed the situation, and acted with the decisive confidence of something that had been winning arguments for 35 million years. The landing party withdrew to a defensive perimeter. The spider disappeared. This was somehow worse. Lieutenant Commander Vorruk-Thane sent her initial report to Fleet Command using the phrase local fauna complications, which was doing considerable work as a phrase. She did not yet know about the box jellyfish in the water to her north. She did not yet know about the saltwater crocodiles to her east, animals that had not changed in 200 million years because they had identified an approach to existence that worked and saw no reason to revise it. She did not yet know about the eastern brown snake, the second most venomous land snake on the planet, extremely common, not particularly large, moving with devastating speed, and this was the detail that would have concerned her most, documented as notably aggressive when startled, which it frequently is, as it tends to rest in locations where it will inevitably be stepped on. She didn't know any of this. She was focused on establishing a perimeter against what she assumed was a local military response. No military response came. What came instead, 40 minutes later, was a cassowary. Preet Sala had written 4 pages about cassowaries. She had felt 4 pages was not enough, but she was over her word count. She had focused on the most salient facts. 1. A large flightless bird, approximately 2 meters tall, present on Earth in roughly its current form for a very long time, which had clearly concluded that flight was unnecessary when you were already the most dangerous thing in your immediate environment. 2. It had a large rigid cask on its head whose purpose human scientists hadn't fully established, but which Preet Sala suspected was simply load-bearing intimidation. 3. The feet. She spent a full paragraph on the feet. The inner toe bore a claw long, rigid, and shaped as if nature had decided a bird should be able to open things. The things nature had in mind were not cans. 4. The cassowary did not negotiate. She had phrased this more academically. Exhibits minimal threat response de-escalation behavior. But what she meant was that the cassowary skipped the stages of warning, posturing, and reluctant aggression that other large animals went through. It moved directly to the phase others reserved as a last resort. The cassowary that entered the Queensland perimeter moved with a quality of silence that Preet Sala had attributed, tentatively, to either remarkable evolutionary stealth or an attitude so absolute that physics simply got out of its way. The sentry who first saw it described it as large, blue, and appearing to consider us a personal affront. The cassowary kicked Corporal Venthalis hard enough to crack the ablative plating on his left thigh guard. The armor held. The corporal stepped back. The cassowary did not step back. This exchange repeated twice before Vorruk-Thane had 6 soldiers form a cordon and spent 11 minutes carefully encouraging the cassowary to leave in a direction that was not toward any of her people. The cassowary left. It did not hurry. Hurrying was not something that applied to it. It looked back once, the way something looks back when checking whether you understood the point it made. Vorruk-Thane updated her report. She changed local fauna complications to significant local fauna complications. In Germany, outside Freiburg, The Central European landing went smoothly for 2 hours. Agricultural land. Fields, forests, a river. The kind of organized landscape suggesting a civilization that had been working the same ground for a very long time and reached an understanding with it. Senior Sergeant Corvelt had done 12 deployments. He looked at the fields outside Freiburg and felt nothing. Not threat, not danger. The faint, pleasant sensation of a mission going to plan. The beehives were in the corner of the field. For white wooden boxes by the fence line. Not obvious. Not large. The kind of thing you walk past without thinking. Especially if you've never encountered them. Especially if the biological surveys section on Apis mellifera was on page 341 and you had not read it. Prietzala's key passage on bees. The social hymenoptera of Sol 3 represent a unique threat category that does not map to any predator type in our standard taxonomy. Individual specimens are small and in isolation of limited concern. The threat is collective, emergent, and triggers with remarkable sensitivity. A colony contains between 20,000 and 80,000 individuals, each capable of delivering venom. A single sting is a minor irritant. However, when a colony perceives a threat, and the threshold for this perception is low, as colonies have been documented responding to vibrations, unfamiliar scents, rapid movement, and what can only be described as general bad vibes, the defensive response is total, coordinated, and involves the simultaneous engagement of potentially the entire colony. She had also noted, the sapient inhabitants are aware of this. Their response has been to continue keeping bees in large numbers while developing protective equipment and an entire agricultural subculture organized around negotiating with an insect that will, if displeased, send 40,000 individuals to express that displeasure at once. We find this very on-brand for this species. Very on-brand was the least professional phrase in the entire 912-page survey. It was also, Prietzala felt, the most accurate. Corvelt's unit disturbed the hives at the 14th minute. Exact mechanism never established. Possibly vibration from the landing craft. Possibly a soldier walking too close. Colonies were sensitive. The incident report described what followed as sudden, overwhelming biological contact event. 43 soldiers. One colony, approximately 60,000 individuals. The armor handled it. Mostly. The visors held. The joints sealed. This was not a serious injury event, but it was a serious morale event. When 43 trained soldiers in full combat armor are suddenly engulfed by a living roaring cloud of something very small and very angry, training does not quite cover what happens next. They ran, not in formation, in 43 different directions. It took 2 hours to reassemble. 2 soldiers made it to the river. One ended up in a farmhouse. The elderly farmer who lived there, a woman named Margaret, offered them tea while they waited for the bees to calm down. They accepted, because at that point they would accept anything. The incident report was marked, classified, /morale sensitive. Someone at Fleet Command wrote in the margin, "What is happening down there?" Vorruk-Thane reviewed the reports that evening. Queensland. Operational, fauna complications, 1 casualty from the spider. Morale listed as cautious. Freiburg. Operational, currently reorganizing, 0 casualties somehow. Morale listed as shaken, and he had a feeling that was generous. 2 other landings proceeding normally. No incidents. 2 out of 4 landings had encountered what the reports called biological contact events within their first hours. In both cases, the biological contact events had involved creatures that were not, by any military taxonomy, dangerous. A spider. Bees. He had an instinct, 14 worlds of instinct, that he was being introduced to something. The way you might be introduced to a person. And that the introduction was not going well. And that the person had many more relatives he hadn't met yet. He called his chief science officer, Zelpras, and asked if there was a full biological survey. There was, she said. 900 pages. She hadn't read it herself. Read it, he said. Tonight. She came to him the next morning. She set her tablet on his desk. She sat down without being invited to, which she had never done before, and looked at him with an expression he couldn't immediately categorize. I've read it, she said. And, a pause. Where did we land exactly? Queensland. Freiburg. 2 sites in North America. 1 in East Asia. She nodded slowly. So, not the ocean. No. What? There's a jellyfish, she said. I need to tell you about the jellyfish. She talked for 3 hours. Vorruk-Thane had received many briefings across his career. Intelligence briefings, strategic assessments, post-battle analyses, briefings that lasted 4 hours and changed nothing, briefings that lasted 4 minutes and changed everything. This was a different kind. This was Zelpras, who had survived 14 conquests with him and maintained across all those years a professional composure he relied on. This was her, talking about a planet, becoming progressively, almost imperceptibly less composed, like a very precise instrument being turned past its rated capacity. She told him about the box jellyfish, 50 centimeters long, transparent, nearly invisible in water. Its tentacles contained venom that attacked the cardiovascular system with a speed she described as almost impolite. It lived in the shallow coastal waters around the continent where he had landed troops. The humans had warning signs about it on their beaches. On their beaches, where they swam. They swam there anyway, she said. In the summer, with their children. Vorruk-Thane stared at her. They know about the jellyfish, he said. They have a specific season for it. They close some beaches. Other beaches they just advise caution. Advise caution. About the jellyfish that can kill you in 2 minutes. She moved on. The hippopotamus. Large, semi-aquatic, responsible for more human deaths on the African continent than any other large animal. Extremely territorial. Capable of running faster than his soldiers in full kit. A jaw that opened nearly a meter and exerted force that the survey's instruments had struggled to measure. Not because the instruments weren't sensitive enough, but because the animal had, at one point during the survey, bitten the measuring device. The African buffalo, known colloquially among local hunters as the Black Death, documented habit of circling back to ambush hunters who had wounded it. Ambush, she said. The buffalo practiced ambush. Then she told him about the moose. The moose, Vorruk-Thane said. I know how it sounds. She pulled up an image. The moose was enormous. Taller than his bipedal soldiers, antlers spreading wider than some landing craft. It lived in the northern regions of the planet in very large numbers and had developed nothing resembling respect for motor vehicles, road infrastructure, or the general principle that things larger than you deserve caution. There are millions of them, she said. Millions. In just one geographic region. The survey team had a collision with one. A pause. The moose was fine. Vorruk-Thane looked at the image for a long time. Go on, he said. The saltwater crocodile, 6 meters long, unchanged in 200 million years because it had identified an approach to existence that worked. Capable of explosive acceleration from a standing position. Could hold its breath for over an hour. The Queensland indigenous human population had a complex and respectful relationship with it, which Preet Sala had documented with what Zelpras could only describe as barely contained awe. The polar bear, which actively hunted. Most large predators minimized risk, ambush from concealment, or scavenging what was already dead. The polar bear, in an environment of endless white where camouflage was entirely possible, chose instead to stalk. Actively, persistently, for kilometers. Because it could. Because it had decided that was how it was going to approach the situation. The cone snail, the size of his fist. Beautiful. Its venom had no antidote. Found on beaches that humans used recreationally. Zelpras paused on this one. They pick them up sometimes, she said. The humans pick them up. The shells are very pretty. They don't always know what they are. And when they find out, sometimes they find out quickly and put them down. And otherwise? She didn't answer that. She moved on. She moved on to the honey badger. And something in her voice when she got there made Vorruk-Thane think this was the one that had gotten to her personally. At 3 in the morning, alone with the survey. The ship quiet, the full weight of the planet settling in. It's small, she said. Body mass comparable to our soldiers' sidearms. It lives in harsh, resource-poor environments that would kill most organisms. It eats things that would kill most organisms. It eats cobras. The survey notes this specifically, as a matter of dietary preference. Preference, Vorruk-Thane said. It appears to enjoy them. The survey team observed one kill and consume a cobra, get bitten, go into brief convulsions, recover, and then continue eating the cobra. She looked at her notes. The entry ends there. I think the survey team needed a moment. He stared at the ceiling. How, he said slowly, have the humans survived on this planet? and Zelpras, who had been professional and composed and careful for 3 hours, said the thing she had clearly been sitting on since she started reading. They evolved here, she said. They grew up with all of this. And it made them. She let that sit. Commander, the humans are not afraid of this planet. They find it interesting. They have nature documentaries. About the crocodiles. Entertainment programming. They watch the dangerous animals for fun. There is a reality television format where they go and find the dangerous things on purpose. They are called wildlife presenters. It is considered a prestigious career. The survey team watched 37 hours of this programming during the approach and found it, I am quoting, deeply instructive and also quite hard to stop watching. Vorruk-Thane was quiet for a long time. What does it mean for us, he said finally, that the dominant species of this planet grew up alongside all of this? She nodded, like she'd been waiting for him to get there. It means we invaded a planet whose sapiens consider the crocodile a neighbor, the box jellyfish a hazard to plan around, the honey badger a fellow survivor. She folded her hands. It means that when we showed up, Commander, they didn't see a fleet. They saw another thing to deal with. The silence in the room was considerable. We should perhaps, Vorruk-Thane said carefully, revisit our threat assessment. The Ontario landing had been going well. Captain Sretvan had established a forward position in a forested area north of a human city. The forest was dense, the trees enormous, quiet in a way he found, unexpectedly, moving, and aside from an alarming encounter with something called a porcupine, which was not in the critical threat tier, but nobody had warned him and the quills had taken 40 minutes to remove from Private Sheldor's forearm. The operation had proceeded without significant incident. The unit was moving along a maintenance corridor through the forest when the moose stepped out of the trees. A bull moose. Full-grown. Late autumn, which the survey noted, on page 367, was the rut. A period during which bull moose experienced hormonal surges that made them, in the survey's careful phrasing, significantly less conflict-averse than at other times of year. The moose was not significantly less conflict-averse. The moose was not conflict-averse at all. The moose, Sretvan would later write, appeared to be conflict-seeking. It stood in the path, nearly 2 meters at the shoulder, antlers spreading 2.5 meters. It looked at the unit with small, dark, immovable eyes and made a sound that the audio log processed as vocalization, threat, ungulate class, and that Sretvan would later describe simply as a sound like a decision being made. The unit stopped. The moose did not move. Sretvan, who had survived 14 conquests, who had advanced on fortified positions under artillery fire, who had once personally led a boarding action against a vessel 2 classes larger than his, did the thing any sensible commanding officer would do. He evaluated his options. Go around. The forest was dense, terrain uneven, 40 minutes minimum, unit cohesion lost. Hold position and wait. Uncertain timeline. Unacceptable for operational schedule. Advance. He thought about option 3 for a long time. He thought about the honey badger recovering from cobra venom and continuing to eat the cobra. He thought about the cassowary looking back. He thought about the way Zelpras had said, they evolved here, and what her face had done when she said it. He chose option 1. It took 53 minutes. The terrain was worse than estimated. 2 soldiers slipped in a creek. 1 lost a boot. They doubled back twice. When they rejoined the path further north, one of his soldiers looked back through the tree line toward where they'd changed course. The moose was still there, standing, watching. Commander, the soldier said. I know, Sretvan said. It's still. I know. He filed the report. He listed the detour as tactical route modification due to terrain reassessment. He did not mention the moose by name. He did not have to. By then, every unit on the surface had started using the word the way you use a word when you mean something larger than the word itself. The moose, they said, when they meant, the planet has opinions about us. The moose, they said, when they meant, I think we may have made a mistake. On the 6th day, the humans sent a representative. This had been anticipated. Standard procedure. Every civilization, when faced with an occupying force, eventually sent someone to talk. Sometimes early, to negotiate terms. Sometimes late, after initial resistance proved untenable. They always came. The humans sent a woman named Dr. Amara Osebansu. Her credentials listed her as a xenolinguist, a diplomatic attaché, and Vorruk-Thane's translator paused on this one. a wildlife biologist specializing in behavioral ecology. He had never, in 14 conquests, received a diplomat who was also a wildlife biologist. He granted her an audience aboard the command ship. She arrived alone, which was either very brave or indicated a quality of confidence he wasn't sure he had a word for yet. She was a small person by human standards, which meant she came up approximately to his collarbone, and she looked around his command deck with the calm, unhurried attention of someone taking inventory. Not fear. Not all. Inventory. Fleet Commander, she said, through the translator. Her voice was even. Thank you for agreeing to meet. You're welcome, he said, because 14 conquests had taught him that courtesy in these early conversations cost nothing and occasionally paid considerably. I understand you represent your planet's governing coalition. I represent an emergency coalition, yes. 112 nations have authorized this conversation. The others are still arguing about the authorization process. She paused. That's actually fast for us. He believed her. I'll be direct, she said. We know we can't match your fleet in orbit. Our military assessment is that a conventional defense is not viable in the short term. She said this with the matter-of-fact quality of someone describing weather. So I'm not here to threaten you or to negotiate a surrender. I'm here to give you information. What information? She looked at him steadily. I'm here to tell you about the planet. He felt something shift in the room. Zelpras, standing to his left, went very still. We're aware of the planet, Vorruk-Thane said carefully. With respect, Commander, your landing reports suggest otherwise. She reached into her bag and produced a physical document, printed, bound, and set it on the table between them. This is a summary. About 200 pages. Practical. Organized by region. I've included photographs. She paused. I wrote it last night. I've been preparing something like it for a while, in case we ever needed it. He looked at the document. In case you ever needed it. We've had the concept of first contact in our culture for a long time, she said. We've thought about it quite a bit. Written stories about it. Made films. The overwhelming consensus in our fiction, historically, was that the alien visitors would be the dangerous ones. A small pause. We may have been looking at that from the wrong angle. Vorruk-Thane picked up the document. He looked at the first page, which had a title, and the title was Things That Will Kill You on Earth and How to Avoid Them. A practical guide for visiting species. There was a subtitle. The subtitle said, Please read this. We mean it kindly. He set it down. He looked at her for a long moment. Why? He said. Are you giving us this? She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke her voice had something in it that he would spend a long time afterward trying to name. Not triumph. Not pity. Something that sat between patience and sadness, like someone who had learned a hard thing early and was still deciding how to feel about it. Because you're not the first thing to show up here with the assumption that size and firepower were the relevant variables, she said. The planet has been running that experiment for about 4 billion years. The things that survived it didn't do so by winning every confrontation. They did it by learning, very quickly, which confrontations were actually necessary. She glanced at the document on the table. Your soldiers have been on the surface for 6 days. I know about the spider. I know about the bees. I know about the moose. She looked back at him. The moose was en route, by the way. Your captain made the right call. Vorruk-Thane was quiet. What is it you want, he said. Same thing everyone wants, she said. To still be here tomorrow. She nodded at the document. Read that. Share it with your ground forces. The second section covers the coastal areas. I'd especially recommend it before anyone goes near the water in northern Queensland. There's a jellyfish. She stood. We're not asking you to leave. We're not in a position to ask that yet. We're asking you to not die unnecessarily while we figure out how to talk to each other properly. Dying unnecessarily tends to make everyone angry, and angry tends to make everything harder. She picked up her bag. There's a section at the back, she said, on the things that look dangerous and aren't. Because it goes both ways. We have an animal called the secretary bird that looks extraordinarily threatening and is actually quite gentle. We have a fish called the blobfish that looks extremely distressing and lives so deep in the ocean you will never encounter it. We thought it was fair to include those. So you have the full picture. She walked toward the door. Dr. Osebonsu, Vorruk-Thane said. She stopped. Your wildlife biology background, he said. Why include that in your credentials? She turned back. Something that might have been a smile. Because I wanted you to know, she said. that the person briefing you on what will kill you on Earth is considered, by her civilization's standards, professionally qualified to have this conversation. A beat. The bar for that qualification involves spending 4 years doing fieldwork in sub-Saharan Africa. She left. The room was quiet for a long time. Vorruk-Thane read the document that night. All 200 pages. He read about the black mamba, which could move at 20 kilometers per hour and whose venom caused complete physiological collapse within hours, and which lived in areas where his East Asia landing had set up supply lines. He read about the blue-ringed octopus, which was the size of a fist, brilliantly beautiful, and carried enough venom to kill a large organism many times over, and which lived in shallow tidal pools that his coastal survey teams had been walking through. He read about the deathstalker scorpion and the Brazilian wandering spider and the inland taipan, which the document noted was the most venomous land snake in the world and which Preet Sala had also covered in the survey. On page 289, in a passage that read like a person trying to remain calm about something that was making it very difficult, he read the section on plants, which he had not known would be a section, and which contained information about the manchineel tree, which was so toxic that standing under it in the rain could cause chemical burns, and beside which the humans had put up warning signs, and past which they had continued walking because the path was right there and they needed to get places. He read about giant hogweed and the sandbox tree and something called gimpy, an Australian plant whose sting caused pain so severe and so prolonged that the document noted, with what he was beginning to recognize as characteristically human composure, first responders in the region are briefed on this plant. We recommend your forces receive equivalent briefing. He read the section on safe regions, which was shorter than the other sections. He read the section at the back, on the things that looked dangerous and weren't. The secretary bird, the blowfish, a large hairy spider called a tarantula, which despite appearances was mostly harmless and had, according to the document, inspired considerable unwarranted fear in our own population, which we find somewhat embarrassing in retrospect given what else is out there. He read the final page, which was a single paragraph, and which read, "We have given you this document because we believe that understanding leads to better outcomes than ignorance, and because we have found, in our own history, that the creatures most likely to cause unnecessary harm are not the ones that are simply dangerous. They are the ones that are dangerous and don't know what else is dangerous. Earth is not hostile. It is simply honest. Everything here is exactly as dangerous as it is, no more and no less. And it has been this way for a very long time. We have learned to live in it not by defeating it, but by learning its terms. We think that's worth knowing." It was unsigned. He sat with it for a while. Then he called his ground commanders, and he told them to halt all expansion operations until every soldier on the surface had been briefed, region by region, species by species, on what they were standing in the middle of. He told them about the coastal waters in Queensland. He told them about the plants. He sent them the document. He told them about the moose, as a reminder that some confrontations were not necessary, and that recognizing which ones those were was not cowardice. It was the thing that had kept life alive on that planet for 4 billion years, and he would rather his soldiers learn it from a briefing than from the planet directly. The briefings took 2 days. On the 3rd day, Vorruk-Thane requested a second meeting with Dr. Osebansu. She came back aboard. Same calm, same inventory-taking gaze around the command deck. She sat down across from him and waited. "I have some questions," he said. "I thought you might." "The gimpy," he said. "Your document says the pain can last for years." "Yes. And people live near it. People live near quite a lot of things. The box jellyfish season," he said. "Your people close some beaches. But not all. Some people feel the risk is acceptable," she said. "We have a strong cultural tradition of evaluating risks and deciding they're acceptable." "The inland taipan," he said. "The most venomous land snake on your planet. It lives in remote areas, your document says. Mostly. But your survey teams have encountered it in other areas." "Yes. And your response to that is?" "To know what it looks like," she said. "And to look where you step." He was quiet. "To look where you step," he repeated. "It sounds simple," she said. "It isn't really. It takes practice. It takes paying attention to things that aren't obviously threatening yet. It takes building a habit of awareness that most organisms don't bother with, because most organisms evolved somewhere that didn't require it." She looked at him evenly. "We required it. So we built it. And then we found it was useful for other things too. He thought about that for a long time. Your coalition, he said. The 112 nations. The others still arguing about authorization. Yes. You don't have a unified government. No. You have never had a unified government. Not in any meaningful sense. No. And yet, he said, you organized a diplomatic mission to an invading fleet in 6 days. She almost smiled. We're difficult to coordinate and very hard to stop, she said. Those are related qualities. He sat back. 14 worlds. Every one of them had looked up at his fleet and seen the end of something. Had sent ambassadors to surrender, or generals to fight, or priests to pray. And in every case they had looked at his fleet the way things look at something larger and more powerful, with the clear-eyed recognition of hierarchy. Dr. Osebansu had looked at his fleet and sent someone to explain the local wildlife. Not because they weren't afraid. He didn't think for a moment they weren't afraid. But because on a planet where the beaches had signs about the jellyfish and the paths had moose on them, and the prettiest shells would kill you and the birds didn't negotiate, fear was not the primary variable. Fear was just the first thing you felt. What you did next was the thing that mattered. What you did next was look where you step. I'd like to continue talking, he said. Good, she said. So would we. Outside, on the planet below, a cassowary moved through the Queensland tree line. A funnel-web spider settled back under its rock. In a field outside Freiburg, 60,000 bees went quietly about their work in 4 white boxes by the fence, calm as long as no one disturbed them, which was all they had ever asked. The moose stood in a northern forest and looked at nothing in particular with the immovable patience of something that had been there long before the visitors arrived and intended to be there long after, in the way that things are patient when the planet itself is on their side. Earth had never been impressed. Not by the fleet. Not by the firepower. Not by 14 worlds of conquest and the certainty that came with it. Earth had simply waited, the way it always waited, for things to either learn its terms or find out what happened next. And this time, for the first time in a very long while, something had chosen to learn.